Hi everyone, I am doing a different kind of video lecture this time. I'm going to be doing a screencast video lecture and I'm going to try to be brief since I wasn't brief in my last video lecture. So for this video lecture, I'm going to be talking about the readings for Module 3. I'm just going to kind of try to briefly go through each of the five short stories that we read for this week and talk about them. Just a quick announcement that I also posted on Canvas, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. But the announcement I posted were handouts for the essay assignment, and the essay that you're writing is a literary analysis. And I wanted to provide a few additional handouts because if we go to Canvas really quickly, and just in case you haven't seen it before, I'm just in modules, and this is the handouts and resources module that I have put up here, and this is where I'm uploading documents. This is the visual guide, and then all of this is what I've uploaded for the literary analysis assignment, and that's right before the course-specific information in Module 1. Excuse me. So you can see that I posted 5 student samples, and I've got samples in different grade ranges, so you can kind of look at which ones. Sometimes students only want to see a sample, sometimes they want to see lower grade samples, so I just kind of provide a little bit of everything so you can look at all of them. You can look at whichever ones you think will be most helpful to you. I've also provided the literary analysis rubric. So the literary analysis rubric is meant to give you a much more, it's not comprehensive, but it's meant to give you a much more in-depth kind of idea of what is it that you should be doing in literary analysis, what are the expectations, and these are ordered in a certain way. They're ordered from like the most important conceptual to the least important, which is MLA integration and basically your writing style. So definitely take a look at that. And then the last thing I uploaded was the literary analysis essay criteria. I have criteria, but I think I call it guidelines in the actual document. I do. So this, again, this reiterates what the actual essay assignment is. The 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 different questions, and you want to choose one of those. And then I just take you through, what you want to do, just some reminders. I talk about, why is it we write literary analysis? What are some of the important things you want to remember? I talk about what the thesis statement should be doing, and then I provide some basic criteria for what I'll be looking for in this paper. So these are all meant to supplement the what's provided for you in Module 3. If we go to Module 3 essay, you'll see that what you have here is the four questions, and then you have and that's kind of it. So there's not much more. So there is a rubric as well, but it's not as in-depth as the one I have, but I definitely recommend you look at the one that's in here as well in Canvas, and then the one that I uploaded as well. So, okay, so I'm gonna move on to the short stories, and the first one I'm gonna talk about is Sunny's Blues. And this one is by James Baldwin, 1957. And the main topics for this week were point of view and theme. I'm going to be talking more about theme than I'm going to be talking about point of view, and that's because, firstly, I'm just more interested in theme than I am point of view. So if I don't talk about point of view enough and you're writing on point of view and you want more information, just let me know. But the other reason I'm talking about theme is because theme is something that in the past students have had a hard time identifying what a theme is or what themes are in terms of a text. Sometimes they confuse them with symbol, so theme is different from symbolism. And symbolism is something that the theme supports symbolism and symbolism supports theme. But a theme is different from symbolism. And also, theme is not setting. So sometimes people will choose the setting or the subject as the theme. So theme can be a little trickier, but once you get the hang of it, it's really easy. So I'm hoping that by talking about some of the themes I found in the 5 short stories that will be helpful for you guys. So the theme that I was most interested in Sunny's Blues, which didn't surprise me when I chose it, was sound and silence. I was actually struggling with pulling a theme out of this short story, but then I was like, oh wait, when I started thinking about sound, all sorts of different examples of sound came out at me, and not just sound, but sound and silence. And I thought this theme was interesting because sound is important to this story because sound, and particularly music, seems critical to how the characters experience the world around them. And there's also this kind of idea that sound equals life, whereas silence is death. So there's a lot to examine in terms of sound and silence, but just to give some examples of the sound and silence in Sunny's Blues is in the beginning of the text, we have the bartender dancing, not danging, I don't know what that word is, dancing, and the jukebox. So when Sunny is talking with an old friend that he doesn't really want to be talking to, he's kind of looking away from the old friend and sees this bartender dancing, and she's dancing to music. So when the jukebox stops, or when it goes silent, she stops. But when the jukebox starts back up, she starts dancing again. So there's this interesting connection between when there's music, she's full of life, but then when there's no music, she's just standing there. Same thing with Gracie. So Gracie is Sunny's brother's young daughter who dies from polio at a young age. But, so she dies from polio. Kind of sad. I think she was only 2. But when she is in their home, so Gracie falls, and there's at first silence, right? There's first nothing, no sound. And Isabel's kind of like, okay, she's fallen, maybe it's okay. But then she gets this gut feeling and she goes to see Gracie, and then she realizes something is really wrong. And then there's Gracie screaming and making a lot of noise. So at this point, this is kind of, she's not just making sound, she's screaming, and then this results in she eventually dies after this. So, when there's nothing, or when there's no silence with Gracie, it's kind of like, she's not there, how is she? But when she's screaming, there's this definite kind of, I exist, but I'm also terrified of, I'm in pain, and I'm, she's dying. So there's a definite connection, just like with the bartender, between how somebody is acting when there's silence versus when there's sound. We also have the sound of the guitar being crushed. So when we get the story about Sunny and Sunny's brother's father their father's brother leaving a bar, I think, and going down a street. So Sonny's, I'm just gonna say Sonny because Sonny's father's brother gets hit by a car and killed, and we get this description of the sound that the guitar makes during the car crash. And it can't be making very good sounds. And this is followed by his brother's death and the sound of nothing or silence on that street. So there's this kind of extreme sound with the guitar. It's very similar to Gracie. And then there's absolutely nothing on the street. There's nobody there, no sounds, anything. We also have the street meeting descriptions of this, or the revival, and we have the singing and the tambourine, and we also have the sounds of coins being dropped in the tambourine, and both Sonny and Sonny's brother are at least watching this just from different areas, and the street meeting is a really interesting description because, street meetings or revivals are, they're supposed to be uplifting or inspirational and happy, but Sonny's brother's description of that doesn't really, at least from my interpretation, the revival wasn't that. The revival seemed to be kind of like, okay, we know these people, we've seen you do this for years, we know who you are, we know how you live, and you're still out here doing these revivals and wanting money from us. So it kind of was like either these people are hypocrites or they live, really contradictory lives unto what they're singing on the streets. But there's a definite, and then when they stop singing, when they stop making all this noise, they either ask for money, and then at the very end, they just kind of turn around and walk away, and there's nothing. So there's this kind of the juxtaposition or the tension between sound and silence here is there's definitely tension. It's kind of like, this was, great sound and I really enjoyed it. It was a little bit depressing when I was reading it. And then Sonny describes one of the women as the woman's voice sounds like heroin. And he says, it sounds like heroin, and, when it's in your veins, it's both, I think he says it's cold and warm at the same time. So this is an interesting description. You can interpret this in many ways. So heroin is something that comes up in the text a lot because Sonny is a heroin addict, not unlike a lot of jazz people who famously died from it. But the description of the woman's voice or the way she sings, the sound she makes sounds like heroin is a weird analogy. But does he mean that he likes it? Or is it similar to his relationship with heroin, whereas he doesn't want to do it, right? He confesses he wants to leave Harlem because he's too tempted by the drugs, but at the same time, he does the drugs and he likes it. So it's just that same kind of idea that humans and sound, there's this tension in the relationship in terms of, we need it, but at the same time, it can be disheartening, for example, with Gracie screaming or with the sound of the guitar making crashes. So, I think he describes the bartender as he doesn't call her a whore, but he calls her something along those lines. But all of these relationships between sound and how that informs how we are connected to the world, it's definitely a complicated and potentially problematic relationship. the final thing is the actual music itself. So there's the jazz and blues music at the end of the story. Let me scroll down just a little bit. But there's a situation where Sunny's brother watches Sunny Creole and the band play. And I think I underlined almost everything in the last 2 pages. But it's at this point that Sunny's brother kind of has, I don't know if it's an epiphany. It's kind of, I can't spell epiphany right. It's kind of an epiphany about music and sound in terms of what it means to life, I guess. But I would say life and death. So it's definitely when Sunny's brother watches Sunny play and this kind of dialogue that's produced between the instruments and then how the music dialogues with the audience or those listening, Sunny's brother definitely has a reaction to that. And he talks about how the music affects him, right? He remembers his mother and he remembers, you know, all the troubles she must have gone to. So he has these memories, but it's described in ways that I wouldn't necessarily consider happy remembering. It's kind of like, this is life. It's kind of sad, and this music is representative of that. And even Sunny kind of talks about, you know, if I couldn't do this, I would just die. Like, there's no other point. So it's, for me, it was a very kind of bittersweet, despondent ending. But again, that's me as a reader. You could interpret it in a variety of ways. Okay, I'm going to move on to William Faulkner. And this was A Rose for Emily. This is William Faulkner, 1931, I think. And this one has really interesting potential for point of view discussion, because I really wanted to know, you know, why Faulkner had it told in the way it was told, because it could have, what I really wanted was like, well, Faulkner, I wish you would have written, you know, I wish you would have written the same story, but from Emily's point of view. So, and so there's a lot of things that could be said about this. One of the main things is we have the setting. I know that's not something we're talking about in the essays, but you have the antebellum South versus the post-Civil War South. So this takes place in a town called Jefferson. And in this city, we see a lot of, again, we see tension between, and antebellum is just the pre-Civil War South. It's just called antebellum. I don't know why. I don't know how it got its name. That's just what it's called. I've never researched it. But we have the character of Emily Grierson, and she's our main character. And because of this tension between the antebellum South versus the post-Civil War South, you could see Emily Grierson as an embodiment of tradition. So this would lead to a theme of change or a theme of clinging to the past, not being able to move on, the theme of tradition, all of that type of stuff. So, and this is seen in a variety of things, and we have the mailboxes. I would just say the mail system. Emily refuses to have a mailbox. I would like to refuse a mailbox, but we can't. We have the city is putting in infrastructure, so it's putting in sidewalks, which is where the northern character of Homer comes in, Homer Barron, and is putting in sidewalks. There we go, prepositions. We also have this kind of the tax situation. So this is with Colonel Sartoris, and you know, before when Emily was younger, when her father died, I think she was about 30, Colonel Sartoris, kind of out of respect for her, remitted her taxes with the, in this kind of unofficial way. And so when the new people come in, they're kind of like, you owe us taxes. And she's like, not giving you anything. I'm not going to give you taxes. I'm not going to give you this. So she's kind of refusing things, right? She's refusing the mail system. She's refusing this new tax situation. And she's just kind of not having it anymore. She just kind of wants to stay, she wants to keep things where they are. And this idea of clinging to the past, we see with Colonel Sartoris, I'm just going to say Sartoris, I don't have to type it all out, where she's constantly referring to him, even though he's dead. She's, tells people, go see Colonel Sartoris, go talk to him, and they're like, he's dead. And then there's a situation with her father, where she refuses to admit that he's dead, and then she finally gives the city his body. And then we have the situation with Homer. Or I was going to write, did she kill him? I'm just going to put murdered. You can interpret that in a variety of ways. But Homer, in their, I guess it's their bridal suite that they're in, and the ending of the story is that, we kind of find out that she continued to sleep next to his corpse since she killed him, right? Because we have the description of her procuring the arsenic, and then we got the description of the smells coming from the house, so we can presume that that's a decaying corpse. But all of these things, Emily is just trying to, cling to the past, and she's not moving on. And Homer is a Yankee, right? He's a Northerner. So in terms of why she killed him, that's open for interpretation. So that's really in terms of what you see, as long as you can point to an area of the text and argue for it. I might argue, for example, if I were writing on this story, I might say, well, I think because he didn't really, he talked about not being the marrying type, she was like, okay, you're dead, and now you're mine forever, and you're not going to change, right? Like, age is not going to get you. This new world is not going to get you. But that's just one interpretation of why she might kill Homer. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next story, where we have the Rocking Horse Winner. And this is by D.H. Lawrence, and another 1930s text, 1933. So, in D.H. Lawrence, he's known for writing about sex, and Lady Chatterley's Lover is probably one of his most famous novels. If you've ever read it or haven't read it, it's a good one, but it was banned, so he really took liberties and really pushed the envelope in terms of what he was writing about. But the Rocking Horse Winner is a really interesting story. It was probably one of my favorites of this week. But there's some obvious themes that pop out of this, but then there's a lot of areas you can go with in terms of how you talk about them. So we have the theme of wealth, we have the theme of luck, you have the theme of success, and or conquering. You've got the theme of materialism. You have the themes of love and money and their relationship. You have, like I've said before, I tend to go psychoanalytic. You have the theme of the sex drive and the death drive and how they're connected. But there's a lot to talk about. I could talk about this particular text for a long time, but all of these would be appropriate themes, and there's probably a few more that you could come up with. But, it's clearly a story about wealth. There's a lot of conversation about luck, success and conquering. So the conquering also, for me, is driven into the sex drive and death drive theme. And that's because I'm really interested in the relationship between the mother and Paul, because he seems his sex drive and his death drive seem very they seem coexisting at the same time, and that's ultimately arguably what could have led to his death. So, and that's a very Freudian analysis of it in terms of the Oedipal complex, but he's very interested in gaining his mother's love, and there's a lot of description of how his, especially in the beginning of the story, how his mother doesn't love him or love her children, and her she feels like she's got like a rock for a heart, and by the end of the story, her heart, she says, becomes a literal stone. And but the description of towards the end, when we hear about this frenzy that Paul gets in while rocking on his rocking horse, is, the subtext is highly sexual, and doing that ultimately leads to his death. So how you examine that, I know ways that I would examine it, but I'm not gonna say here because it would just take more time. But it arguably could be, a direct commentary on the relationship between the mother and Paul, right? Whether Paul has this kind of subconscious sexual fantasy for his mother, or, why he, and it eventually leads to his death. So, but the story is also about, the woes of money, and how striving for money is really not a very worthwhile thing, because money can never really solve problems, and we see that amplified with the whispering in the house that becomes screaming, when Paul ends up just giving his mother all of the 5,000 pounds. But there's definitely some kind of cautionary warnings in this story, but how you talk about the cautionary warnings is up to you for interpretation, as long, again, as you point to the text. And the name Malabar is really interesting. I did a lot of research on this. That's the name of the last horse. It's the horse that wins the Derby in the very end. So I'm saying Derby. But Malabar has allusions to exotic locations, because it's a place in India, I believe. I hope I'm getting that right. But there's also Malabar nightshade, which is a poisonous plant. So this horse that, in order to get this name, the name of the horse that wins at the end of the last horse race at the Derby, ends up, after Paul actualizes, okay, Malabar is going to win, that's when he dies. So there's also this kind of like, you did all of this, you want all these things, and this is what it got you in the end. Okay, moving on. The next one is the prodigal son, and this is actually taken from the Bible, from the book of Luke. This particular version was the King James version in 1611, I think, but it goes obviously much older than that. But the prodigal son, it's very short, so I don't have too much to say about it, but there's some really good themes in here. The theme that came to me as the most significant was the theme of being lost. And you could also argue, or let me make that a separate, no, I'll just keep it the same. And I'll just make this themes. The birth and death. And that's because we have these allusions to the drought and the land, and then there's kind of rebirth. And so what's happening with the land is reflective in what's happening with the younger brother in this story. So, or I think they call it a parable. But the younger son is lost, so to speak, allegorically and, textually. He's lost. And, he spends very recklessly and extravagantly, and he has nothing to kind of show for it. And then he comes back and he's kind of scared to come back to his dad or his father because he feels like he's going to get scorned. And then he ends up having the opposite homecoming than he expected. And as it's repeated in the parable, it's kind of he was lost and then he was found. And that idea of being lost and found is reflected in this idea of birth and death, that death can be synonymous with being lost, right? And then being found can be synonymous with birth. So, and then again, we see that reflected in what's happening with the land as well. So that's just an idea of some themes. So the last story you had to read was Tell Them Not to Kill Me. And this is by, and I hope I don't say it wrong, Juan Rulfo. And this is 1953. And this was a story. The main theme, and shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody who's been watching my video lectures, but right away I was so excited when I found out that the Colonel was Don Lupe's son. I was like, yeah, revenge, cool. Sorry, I'm just have worked with revenge tragedy for so long, but theme revenge and justice, and so that pulls up a lot of questions. The theme could just be revenge. It could just be justice. It could be both. But again, those aren't the only themes. I'm just going to address those particular ones. And so we have the situation where, and I hope I don't say his name wrong. Please correct me if I do. Juvenicia's animals needed to graze in Don Lupe's, can't spell anything right, I would say on Don Lupe's land. And there was a drought happening. And so, right, we get that description of like Juvenicia would create this hole so the animals could get through, and then Don Lupe would close it up, and then Juvenicia would open it, and then Don Lupe would close it, right? They kind of go back and forth. And finally, Juvenicia's like, okay, look, the animals need to graze on your land. They're dying. And Don Lupe's like, if I see another animal on my land, like, I'm gonna kill it. And so that's what he does. So Don Lupe kills one of Juvenicia's animals. And that results in Juvenicia killing Don Lupe. And that results in, and this is how revenge works, this kind of like, and that's why revenge, you often see the infinity symbol come with revenge, because revenge is considered to be like an infinite cycle, like it never stops. So Juvenicia then kind of spends the rest of his life up until he dies at the end of the story in hiding. And, he talks about losing everything. His wife leaves him. He has to hide in the mountains and eat grass, and because he's trying to escape from being caught for this. And he's eventually caught, and they bring him in for supposed justice, and the Colonel brings him in, and that's when it's revealed that the Colonel is one of Don Lupe's children that has been seeking Juvenicia for years, and he brings them in, and Juvenicia tries to tell him, like, look, I've already suffered, I lost everything, I'm old, I'm about to die, like, what are you gonna get if you kill me? And then at the end of the story, we find out that he gets shot, and then the story ends by Juvenicia's son taking his dead body back to where his son and his son's family lives. So, the question here in terms of theme would be, I could talk about, well, what is justice? But the idea would be, was there justice given to, it started with Don Lupe killing one of Juvenicia's animals. And then, was Juvenicia I spelled it wrong, sorry. Was Huvnesia, did this cancel out this, right? Or is it worse? Or is this enough, penance for Huvnesia based on the crimes that he did, based on the crimes that Don Lupe did? So it becomes like a discussion of, well, what's revenge and what's justice, and was it given, and should the colonel have killed him, or did he have the right to, or did Huvnesia suffer enough? And what does justice look like? And, is it gained? And if so, how? If it wasn't, why not? So those are all the stories that are for this week, and the 5 stories. So I hope that this helped a little with talking about, in particular, like I said, I was going to talk about theme, but also make sure that you, again, look at those handouts that I posted on Canvas to help with the actual writing of the essay and the literary analysis. And if anyone has any questions, like as always, please feel free to contact me. And I hope everyone has a very happy Halloween. Bye-bye.